We were off, headed to Canada's great northeast. We had 1,290 miles and 2 days to go just to get to the border. Day 1 destination, Niagara Falls. Everybody was right, you should definitely see it from the Canadian side. It turned out to be more like a Disney World attraction than a national park. After leaving Niagara Falls, we would spend the night at CAYUGA Lake State Park. We arrived, set up camp, and went to bed, excited to get even closer to the border the next day. Day 2, just like the first, we were trying to get some miles in. After about 390 tolls through New York State and 8 hours of driving, we made it to WINSLOW Memorial Park, Freeport, Maine. Second night's camp went up faster than the first. We had a quick dinner and decided to explore the area. We got on the road early on day 3 because we didn't know how long the border crossing would actually take.
So what's funny is we just ran into northbound expeditions at a gas station right at the border on their way home into Canada. So we're going to follow them in. Here's the Canadian border crossing. It's massive. Let's see how this goes.
After a mandatory search of our vehicles because we had brand new passports, we were off. The border agents were very polite and wanted to go with us on our trip. Virgil and his family from Northbound Expeditions took us to a nice little restaurant right on the bay for a seafood lunch, where I would discover my love for lobster rolls and my pursuit to find the best one in Northeast Canada. After an awesome lunch and even better company, we split ways and headed for our first Canadian camp spot in New Brunswick. We definitely plan on coming back just to spend more time in the area. We searched Overlander for a great camp spot right along the coast and found one at QUACO Head Lighthouse on the Bay of Fundy. The Bay of Fundy tidal changes can be so dramatic, ranging from 11 feet to 53 feet in tidal height change. It looked like a river going out for low tide. The highlight of our night was getting to meet some of the locals who were just out for a stroll. We got to share a beer with them, and they gave us a lot of great info about the area.
Well, we woke up in St. Martin's. We're heading to get lobster rolls for breakfast from the little tiny shack on the main strip of town, and we're going to head up and camp on the most northwest point area of Prince Edward Island.
Going north from New Brunswick, Canada to Prince Edward Island gave us some beautiful views, but we were not expecting Confederation Bridge. The bridge takes about 12 minutes to cross. It's 8 miles long. The average height off the water is 131 feet. I have never been on a longer bridge. We crossed over onto Prince Edward Island to see nothing but red dirt fields. As we headed to North Cape on the most northwest point on Prince Edward Island, as far as the eye could see were red fields from potato farms, hundreds of windmills, and thousands upon thousands of lobster pots along the coast. First stop on Prince Edward Island, the Wind and Reef Restaurant, where I had my third lobster roll and watched the lobster boats do their thing. After getting to our first camp spot that we found on Overlander, we were quickly turned around by a local who took us to one of her favorite spots a little bit further up the beach. This would become, up to this point, the best camp spot of the year so far. After a short 3.5-hour drive, we got to Richard's Seafood. I had seen this place on Vice Channel's Munchies show with Maddie Matheson. The food looked good, but you could never tell. But then they set that giant mamma jamma of a lobster roll in front of me, and I was in heaven. This one got a perfect score, 10 out of 10. After another 3 hours of beautiful scenery and rolling hills, we reached Woods Island, where we boarded the ferry to go to Nova Scotia. Just a quick heads up to those traveling with animals. On this ferry, they're not allowed inside, so Bivy and I had one very windy and cold ride on the deck for 2.5 hours as we crossed to Caribou, Nova Scotia. After crossing from Prince Edward Island over to Nova Scotia, we headed to stay near the ARISAIG lighthouse. After a short drive, we were at the CANSO Causeway, which connects Cape Breton Island with the rest of Nova Scotia over the Strait of CANSO. We are officially on the Cabot Trail, which is a scenic highway loop stretching 185 miles around the most beautiful country Cape Breton Island has to offer. We decided to do a little bit of trail riding, but after picking up about 180 pounds of extra weight in mud, we headed towards the coast. Once you hit the coast on the Cabot Trail, you understand why it is world-renowned for its views. It had been about 48 hours since I've had a lobster roll and I was fiending, so we stopped in Chetty Camp where I had lobster roll number 5. Just north of Chetty Camp is where the Cabot Trail really shows its beauty, and this is where you enter the Cape Breton Highlands National Park. Highlands National Park covers over 366 square miles of beautiful mountains and coastline. Everywhere you look is something off of a postcard. We could have spent the whole day in just this 5-mile section. Right where the Cabot Trail cuts east to go across the heart of Cape Breton Island is French Mountain. In the center of the Highlands Park is a tundra-like plateau, which in places still had snow on the ground. Capstick is the last small town before you hit Meat Cove. The 7-kilometer road to get to Meat Cove is a mix between perfectly paved roads and potholes from hell. Meat Cove is the most northerly settlement in Nova Scotia that you can drive to. The campground's opening was delayed due to a later winter, and since it was private property, our only option was to drive down to the beach and set up camp. For any traveler going to Nova Scotia, Meat Cove has to be a bucket list destination. Later in the evening, after setting up camp and while taking a quick walk on the beach, I spotted the one and only wolf seal that I would see on this trip. I'll just say it got a little interesting at night trying to sleep with that much wind. In the morning, we packed up camp, said goodbye to Meat Cove, and headed south. thanks to Renee scouting all over Gaia Maps, she found us this sweet little spot. After being turned around a few times because I wasn't paying attention to the maps, we got to see moose for the first and only time on our trip. I read ahead to see how much these ferries would cost, but since this one has been out of commission for a while, they didn't charge us. And the Little Narrows ferry only costs us $7 Canadian. After crossing the Little Narrows ferry, which only took about 3 minutes, we had a 90-mile drive to get to our last camp spot on Cape Breton. The first camp spot that we found using Gaia Maps with the Backroad Mapbooks Canada overlay was beautiful, but a little exposed. I had pulled up a premium weather report using our Garmin InReach Mini. The winds were already high and we were supposed to get higher winds later that night. So we used the drone to scout out a little bit and we saw a more sheltered spot down the coast. A quick tip, make sure you download maps before you go. It helped us a lot because we were able to find the perfect spot for the night. We had plenty of room in the XV-3 for food, but we also knew that we'd be doing a lot of miles every day. So when we got to camp, we did not want to spend a lot of time making food. So with the jet broil, a can of fuel, some water, and a bunch of Mountain House meals, We ate very well, and honestly, they do taste good. I love breakfast for dinner. If I had to pick one piece of gear that we could not live without on this trip, it was the thermocell. As soon as we turned it off, this happened. We woke up to one of our only rainy mornings, packed up, got on the road, and headed back towards southern Nova Scotia. And on our way south, we even spotted this little jewel. Cape Breton Island was truly one of the most beautiful places that we have ever been. If you ever get the chance, do the Cabot Trail, stop and meet Cove, and don't forget your bug repellent. Leaving Cape Breton, we headed southwest towards the Bay of Fundy. Hall's Harbor was definitely on our list to check off. Hall's Harbor isn't very big, but it is extremely unique. During low tide, the lobster boats are sitting right on the ground. If you sleep in here, you're not fishing that day. We had to stop and get lobster roll number 6 at Hall's Harbor Lobster Pound. I'll just say, it wasn't a great lobster roll, but they are famous for their full lobster dinner. We arrived at BLOMIDON Provincial Park late in the afternoon. This place has awesome primitive camp spots and even better shower accommodations. You drive up to BLOMIDON Park as it sits on a plateau overlooking the Bay of Fundy, but we arrived too late to hike to the overlook. We were going to get up the next morning and go check it out, but the fog had set in and you couldn't see more than 30 feet in front of you. As soon as we descended off the plateau, it cleared right up. We'll call this section of the trip Wife's Day. She wanted to visit Halifax, Peggy's Cove, and Lunenburg, so we hit all three in one day. If you look up Peggy's Cove on Google, it looks like a beautiful place that no one's ever at that you can go and take pictures of. But when you pull into the area, it's just the opposite. Full of tourists, much like us. It was just a little overcrowded, but still worth the drive. This place is beautiful. After lobster roll number 7, which was good, we got our passports stamped upstairs in the shop and then hiked around to see the sights. After Peggy's Cove, I was a little done with tourism, but when we got to Lunenburg, its Google search pictures did not disappoint. Full of beautiful old ships, brightly painted homes, and an awesome quiet boardwalk. Leaving Lunenburg, we headed south for Ovens Natural Park. The Ovens National Park is a privately owned 190-acre pristine reserve of coastline forest. This was really a special place. We got there later in the day, so we set up camp and went to bed pretty early. Checked the weather because we found a great camp spot near the end of the island, but it was extremely windy. The next morning we packed up, drove to the trailhead, and hiked along the cliff trails down to the sea caves called Ovens. Wow. Just wow. One thing that I did not expect to find was the Rose Bay General Store. This little place had it all, including the best lobster roll that I would find on this trip. If you get a chance, stop by and have one yourself. We loved Ovens National Park, but it was time to leave. We are heading towards Breton Island. 20 minutes southwest of Digby, we came around a corner and there was a thick shroud of fog. It was eerie, but beautiful. To get to Breton Island, you have to cross one of two ferries, the Petite Passage Ferry and the Tiverton Ferry, both of which only take about 20 minutes to cross, but with the fog it made it an awesome experience. Getting onto the Tiverton Ferry, we are anxious to see Westport. Pryor Island only has around 220 residents, and there are only 98 private dwellings inhabited year-round. The island only has one general store, one gas station, one cafe, and one hotel. We fueled up and headed down to Big Pond Cove. We were hoping to see more of the island, but didn't have high hopes because of how thick the fog was. We had one more destination to try to get to before we set up camp, Briar Lighthouse. You could hear the lighthouse before you saw it. We hiked around a bit and then went to our camp spot that a local told us about in the cafe. We sent a quick message back home saying that we were okay. Then we set up camp for the night, had some bivvy playtime, and let the smooth sound of the lighthouse put us to sleep. The next morning we had a surprise visitor at camp. It was a Coast Guardman that we had met the day before. He invited us to check out the boats they work on. His name was Neil Green, and he'd been Coast Guardman for 33 years. He was stationed on the Coast Guard cutter Westport. Coast Guard cutter Westport has a crew of 4, has a 200 nautical mile range, and they get between 80 and 100 calls a year. Something that really stuck out to me is he said that when they get an emergency call, it's not just them that go out. The whole community comes together to help whoever's in trouble. What I found to be the coolest part about this boat are the two 700 horsepower Caterpillar diesel motors. Boatman Neil Green is an avid off-roader and all-around badass. Thank you for the tour. You're just one more reason why we thought Canada had some of the most welcoming people we've ever met. As soon as our tour was done, we had to jump back on the ferry to get back across. They only run once an hour. Just like the previous day, after crossing both ferries and traveling up Long Island, as soon as we got near Digby, the fog cleared. We pulled into Digby with just enough time to grab a quick lunch, then head to the Fundy Rose. The Fundy Rose is a passenger ferry that runs between Digby, Nova Scotia and St. John's, New Brunswick. The ship is 406 feet long, has two 5,500 horsepower motors, which pushes it to 25 knots max speed. and can carry a little over 1,300 passengers. This thing had it all. A bunch of different lounges, movie theater, bar, cafe, coffee shop, gift shops, and awesome decks to look out over everything. We were back in New Brunswick, so we headed down to the Jeep. Bivvies was really happy to see us after 4 hours in the car, and we traveled southwest to our last camp spot in Canada. New River Beach Campground was a pleasant surprise with awesome shower facilities, and it had level camp spots everywhere. We made a quick stop in the morning down to the beach, which, by the way, they don't allow dogs or alcohol on. Kind of a lame beach. Before we headed back to the border. The American side border agents weren't very pleasant. Welcome back home. And then we headed down to Bar Harbor in Acadia National Park. Time to see if Bar Harbor had any good lobster rolls, so we stopped at Stuman's Lobster Pound, and it was okay. Acadia National Park looked a lot like Cape Breton's Cabot Trail. The park is set up in one big loop, going one way, and in the right lane you can pull over and park anywhere. One spot we did stop was Thunder Hole, and we got there at the wrong tide level, so we didn't get to see its full force. Cadillac Mountain was the last geographical spot that we would see before we head back home to Kentucky. Cadillac Mountain is 1,530 feet in elevation and is the first place to see the sunrise on the East Coast of the United States. One more lobster roll before we go back to Kentucky. While we were in Acadia National Park, I heard a little bit more road noise than I was used to, so we took it to get in alignment and found out we were towed out quite a bit from all the potholes on Backroads Canada. And when we got back into Kentucky, we found out we also had a cracked radiator and some bent cams and lifters. All in all, this was the perfect trip. Over 4,500 miles traveled, 10 states, New Brunswick, Canada, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, all the locals we got to meet. I would do it all again tomorrow.